Thanks for the reminder. Yeah, forgot.
I'm usually the one who forgets. um, yeah, so for me, an empathic way of being means um, I think it means being curious about uh, what I'm experiencing and what other people are experiencing. And rather than evaluating it in terms of the rightness or wrongness of what's happening, evaluating it in terms of the needs that I might be having or that other people might be having, which is very much in alignment with the nonviolent communication principles. But that has been, that's been very useful for me. and 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 it helps me stay in curiosity and um, in wanting to understand what's going on, both for myself and for others. I'll pause there.
So I heard that for you, the empathic way of being is really about being curious rather than evaluating. Although I did hear that if you're evaluating someone's need, not their way of being.
Or the
And I
right
heard that,
wrongness of it, right?
yeah. And then I heard that it aligns nicely with the nonviolent principles, which works really well for you and helps you stay in that curious space and that curious frame of mind.
Yeah, and the other thing that's coming to mind is just how many different ways there are of expressing that empathic presence. And so, in the empathy circle, we do it a lot with words by saying what we understand the person is what is going on, and that's very useful. But also just a silent presence, looking at someone in the eyes, making physical contact with them, taking an action that you think recognizes or acknowledges what's going on with them. So it could be, verbal, nonverbal, physical, a sound, I guess you could sing a song. I mean, there are all the different ways of human expression, and also just being present are all ways of expressing empathy, I think, or being an empathic presence.
I heard that for you, there are so many ways to express this experience. In our circle, we use words and reflecting, which works really well as a practice, but there's also holding the space. There's the contact whether it's physical, emotional, or just with your eyes, and and then also the actions that we can take to recognize another person.
Yeah, and then I think another component of it is being empathic with myself. So empathy can be expressed externally for others or other things, and then internally, which is also really important. Because being tuned into my own desires and recognizing what those are, even if they can't be met all the time, certainly helps me. And to the degree that what's going on for me internally is a block, if I got a lot going on, then that's a block for me being able to be empathic present for others, an awareness of that, and having some tools, ways to respond to it, I think is useful.
So I heard that self empathy came up in that for you as well as others, the external of doing with others, but also the internal of yourself, and how awareness is so important because it allows you to impact with the tools that you have any blocks that you might be having to that empathy so that you can address that with yourself first and then show up to the experience.
And I love this process because as I'm saying this and you're reflecting about, other things are coming up for me. So the other thing that's coming up is, I think, recognizing that being an empathic way of being means valuing connection over other things. And I'm very aware that I do value that most of the time, you know, well, and I think it's useful too, because even if you're trying to do things in the world, you know, and have relationships with people or influence people, even if you're trying to create change, you know, having a connection before you try to educate someone or ask them for something or influence them or tell them something, give them some feedback, having a connection with them is essential before you do that. And so connection before those other things. So there's both I don't know, I guess a philosophical value thing of valuing connection over things, and then also a very practical reason to do it.
So I heard that the last thing that came up for you is that it really, an empathetic way of being, it means valuing a connection over other things, right? And like you connect first and then you can do all the other things. So not only is it practical, impactful, and useful, but it is a way of being with each other. The way of being with each other.
That was
Yeah.
the time too. Our
Okay.
timekeeper is not
Great. I
holding
was
up
going to
the
say,
sign.
because I feel like I'm about done. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for hearing me, Kara.
One quick question, Edwin. Did everyone see the time on my, instead of holding up the sign?
I do
'Cause I'm
see it.
actually,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought.
so if everyone could
Sorry, I
just
did
pay
not-
attention, no
Yeah, I
worries.
did not notice it. Thanks for
Yeah.
pointing that out.
No worries. I enjoyed so much hearing you share. Thank you.
And I know when I start talking, I just get into a zone and I'm not really looking at it. Okay, I will talk to Jana, since we have you here. We'll get you going while you're here. Okay. So I'm excited because this is probably my third or fourth round of this. What is an empathetic way of being mean to us? And every time I feel like I'm so close to being like, that's what it is. I'll pause there.
So this is your third or fourth time in a round of what is an empathic way of being mean to you, and every time you feel like you're really almost approaching very close to what it actually is, like nailing it.
Thinking about the way a person is, like there are people who have a happy way of being or a sad way of being or a Nazi way of being or a hippie way of being, right? When I think of people who have an empathetic way of being, they have this ability to create space. It's like kind of how Lou said it, it starts inside. You have to become aware of your own nonsense so that you can handle yourself. But then you get to create a space for others to come into that quiet.
So you're contrasting and comparing an empathic way of being with, happy, sad, Nazi, different ways of being that people can be. And an empathic way of being is for you, first self-awareness, being aware, but then allowing a space, creating a space for the other person to enter and be connected with, be comfortable with.
Yeah, connected is definitely a part of it. I would use authentic as the word. You create a space that allows another person to be their authentic self with zero expectations or qualifications.
So I kind of added this connected. So you say, okay, but actually authentic is more to the point that you're allowing a person a space to be their authentic self without any judgment or additions or subtractions.
Yeah, I think the empathic way of being is, it starts with ourselves, but it is how we allow ourselves. It's like It's like I give a lot of grace because I need a lot of grace. So that is an empathetic way of being me, is to recognize that if I need it, probably everybody else does too.
So you're sharing that it's a way of, it's not only self-awareness, but it's also a way of relating, and you feel like you need a lot of grace, so you want to give a lot of grace. And so that recognition, that acknowledgement, if you need it, probably everybody else needs it. So it's allowing another person to be their authentic self.
Yeah. So that would be what an empathetic way of being would be to me, is being able to hold a space that allows self-grace so that someone else is comfortable enough to be their authentic self in that space.
So an empathic way of being is a way to hold self-grace so that another person feels comfortable enough to be their authentic self.
That feels good. Thank you. I feel fully heard. Your turn.
Thank you. I don't know, has somebody not gone? Colin, you want to listen to me?
Yes, Yana, go ahead.
No, I'm kind of awed by the detail and thought and extent of expression of Lou and Kara with regard to an empathic way of being.
So I'm hearing that you're in awe of what you've heard before from both Kara and Lou in terms of the detail and how they're expressing themselves.
Yeah, because for me, I just think, oh, very short, embodying kindness is, an empathic way of being.
And for you, you're summing it up in a couple of words: embodying kindness.
Yeah. The ethics of virtue, sometimes it's called the ethics of virtue.
Okay, another way of saying that would be the ethics of virtue in your words.
Yeah, like doing whatever is appropriate at the most appropriate time as best one can with a motivation of kindness.
So doing the right thing at the right time and with that intention of being kind or wanting to be kind.
Yeah, or you could say that an empathic way of being is maybe one, this relational practice that we're doing is one facet of a practice of embodying kindness.
Okay, and the relational side of empathy, it's one aspect of this kindness that you're talking about, embodying kindness.
Yeah.
Towards others.
Yeah, I feel fully heard, actually.
Okay, thank you. Violetta, sorry. Crystal, I was trying to figure out who hadn't gone. Crystal, can you be my listener? Okay, thank you. Well, I went and read Roger's paper again because I kind of thought that's what we'd be basing our empathy circle on. But no matter, maybe I can just feed back some of my thoughts on that.
So in terms of our conversation today, you went back and read Carl Rogers' paper, and you're basing some of your thoughts on that you're going to share with us.
Okay, yes. I think one of the central themes that's in the paper is this idea of experiencing. And in particular, the felt meaning, that being sensitive to this felt meaning that's within us, by feeling into our bodies and experiencing that to its fullest. Yeah,
so I'm hearing you reflect on the power of this felt being, this idea of experiencing our inner presence or awareness?
Yes, it's about the bodily sensations, your gut feeling. By making space, by being able to go in to allow the other person, for example, if you're showing empathy to someone else, to go within themselves, to connect with this gut feeling and find the meaning that's behind it, experience this gut feeling to its fullest and discover the meaning that's behind it. So that a person can know themselves better.
Yeah, so I'm hearing you say that making space in yourself for those gut feelings and to raise our awareness of the meaning that is coming from this capacity to be empathic, or I'm struggling here.
Okay. Yes, we can do that for ourselves. That would be self-empathy, but we can also support another person. I guess that would be more the relational side, to connect with their gut feeling, by just being there for them, by maybe giving an empathic guess, to try and get at what he calls this felt meaning, which is experience, it's a flow of experiences, and that is how we can understand ourselves better. And I can do that for you if I'm being empathic towards you.
So I'm hearing you say that it's this felt meaning, this shared experience, this getting in the flow together with someone that demonstrates an alignment and a way of being empathic with each other.
Mm-hmm. I think I've read through this paper a few times, and it's really great that I have this opportunity to talk about it out loud, because it's helping me to formulate my thoughts better. I think maybe I'll do that in the next round. But just in summary, it's very much a visceral experience, that we can support someone else to have this visceral experience and to find meaning in that, to help them realize change or personal growth, whatever it might be.
Yeah, so I'm hearing you describe the beauty of this empathy circle in establishing this connection and this felt meaning and shared experience that really bridges a connection of that shared experience.
Mm-hmm. And the visceral experience that, you know, in your body, that can be supported by someone being empathic towards you, and the meaning that that can give you.
Yeah, and the visceral experience that comes from that connection and that felt meaning that you share.
Okay, thank you. I feel fully heard.
Thank you, Colin. DJ, would you be my listener, please?
Sure.
Excellent. Wow, I'm just going to take a deep breath. I'm so inspired by everyone's comments this morning.
So you're just going to take a deep breath because you're so inspired by everyone's comments this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are.
Yeah. I'm thinking about how life gives us whatever experiences we really need for our evolution.
You're thinking about how life gives us whatever experiences we need for our own evolution.
And that when we start judging, it demonstrates a blockage.
When we start judging, it demonstrates a blockage.
And when we start judging, it demonstrates where we're stuck and where we're not connecting with the humanity in someone else.
And when we're judging demonstrates where we're stuck and when we're not connecting with the humanity in another person.
Yeah. And I love what Lou said about being curious and what Colin said about the felt meaning in our shared presence and a way of being that opens the door to accept, for better or worse, the halo effect, as you mentioned, whatever it is that life is showing us about ourselves.
Okay, so I don't think that I could get that. That was long.
Sorry. I
I'm sorry. You
apologize.
started with Lou. And what did you say about Lou?
Let me reframe.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Don't
Because I
worry.
tried to, I was
I
looking
went
for
too
meaning.
long. No, I went too long.
Well, it was complicated for me.
Yeah, I totally get it. So I love how Lou shared this capacity that we have to be present and be curious versus being judgmental. And I'll pause there.
Thank you. So you love what Lou said about being present and being curious in relation to the empathetic way of being.
Yeah. And then how Colin built on that with being aware of our shared felt presence and where we might be blocked in our visceral reaction. Yeah.
So Colin built on that idea of in reference to that shared connection and how there's that visceral aspect.
And it makes me realize that when we judge, that's when we're moving into our blockage zone.
This makes you aware of that. When we judge, we're moving into our blockage zone.
And our capacity to be present and aware that we're judging is part of the empathic connection, and how we can build on that to reconnect sometimes when we have disconnected.
Okay. So this awareness about what Lou said and what Colin said helps us recognize our blocks or that we're judging at that moment, in that present moment. And then we can maybe reconnect or disconnect or make some kind of choice based on that awareness.
Yeah, with just an eye, and I'll close with this, towards seeing the humanity in the person in front of you, rather than seeing what may be our bias.
So it's a matter for you of seeing the humanity in front of you rather than seeing your bias.
Yeah, and owning that. Thank you. I feel fully heard.
And owning that. Okay, good. Great. Violetta?
I'm listening, DJ.
Yeah. Well, I kind of struggle, with this way of being and describing it and defining it, because I have the way of being that's inside me that's empathetic, right? I'll stop there.
You're kind of struggling putting into words this empathic way of being because it is so much inside of you. You're living it.
Right. But I know also cognitively that my way of being is merely my way of being, and that I can't extrapolate that to everyone.
So the struggle is not just with words, it's also knowing that your way of being cannot be extrapolated to others. It's yours. It's DJ's way of being.
Right. And so I want to have the big picture because that's why we're here, right? And I want to be able to talk about the way of being empathetic or the empathetic way of being in a way that would be useful to more individuals than just myself.
you do find meaning in us gathering together and talking about a definition of an empathic way of being, so that it would serve whatever you could bring, would serve not just you, but also others.
Right. And I am still struggling with it. And I go back to the relational empathy exercise that we did together, where we were brainstorming the different concepts of relational empathy.
The struggle is still present for you, but you are going back to the exercise we did with the relational empathy and the concepts we worked through.
Right. And we're going to be revisiting those when I talk about relational empathy. And so for me, the way of being, or the empathetic way of being, is the embodiment of the relational way of being, or the empathetic relational way of being. That makes sense?
Okay, I'll try.
It's the embodiment. Okay, so there's an embodiment, right? So like Crystal was saying, and Lou and Colin have all been talking about today, there's that presence, there's that embodiment, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's a relationship between self and the relational. So, right? That self and relational part.
Mm-hmm.
And I see it as an empathetic way of being the self and the relational self. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'm
So
saying.
as you're struggling towards a definition that will be conditional, but is somewhat external to you, so that it will serve others, you are talking about embodiment and relation being kind of the basic connection and interaction that is foundational for an empathic way of being. In that definition, there's a self, there's me that has my empathic way of being, but there's also a relation in which I'm relating to the other's way of being, and the empathy happens in between the two in the relation.
Exactly. Yes, thank you. I feel fully heard.
Okay, you are welcome. Thank you. Edwin, would you be my listener, please?
Yep, listening.
Okay. I will bring my full theoretical. I will be just completely open with my framework. First, I still feel embarrassed that I didn't follow what we're doing today, and I came completely confused. But I'm excited to talk about the empathic way of being. And I'm bringing a mixture of phenomenology and psychological phenomenology, psychological psychoanalytic phenomenology into the definition of an empathic way of being. That started from Roger, so it's complicated. Edwin, you're welcome.
Yeah, so it's it's complicated what you're trying to say, but I think you're trying to say that you're going to bring who you are to the table, which is this philosophical, phenomenological point of view, and you're a little embarrassed that you weren't quite prepared for what we were doing today too.
Usually my empathy is reflected in my effort to adapt to the framework of the person I'm talking to. But today I wanted to share a little bit what is my framework. So that's what I mean by the fullness of my theoretical, of how I think through the topic.
Yeah, you just like to share the fullness of how you think through a topic, because usually you try to adapt to the person you're relating to, but you're just wanting to start with giving that background about yourself.
So my major influences there are, as listed, are Rogers, who is stepping and is swimming in phenomenology, and then attachment theory that is deeply psychoanalytical or psychodynamic. Do you want me to stop there? So these are the two sources, theoretical sources that, well, three, I guess.
Yeah, you're just explaining how your theoretical foundation for what you're going to be talking about comes from. And one is it's grounded in Rogers and his phenomenological view. Then I think there's some, I don't remember the others.
the psychoanalytic attachment theory. type
Oh,
of-
attachment theory,
Okay.
right? Psychoanalytic,
Yes.
attachment theory, analytic attachment theory. How was the
I
other
do
one?
notice I have 1 minute, so I promise I won't talk. The empathic way of being, according to me, is the only way of being for human beings. I think we are finding ourselves in the other first, and then we're shaped by that interaction with the other, as I'm finding myself in the eyes, in the smile, in the touch of my ultimate other, usually my primary caregiver in the beginning, and then other partners as I go through life. And an empathic way of being means becoming even better at being human, becoming this version of a human being that is functioning at its highest and in relating to the other at its best.
So I think you're saying that an empathic way of being is sort of core to being human, and that we can sort of improve that. And that empathic way of being, other people seeing us, is how we sort of develop our sense of self and maybe our identity.
So whatever DJ said, all the way she explained the impossibility, but also the necessity of connecting and relating to one another without ever fully able to see 100% accurately the other, even express my own self but as I'm steeped in the empathic way of being, I become even better. I'm just making steps towards a connection that's never fully going to happen, but I could become closer to a good version of that, as she calls it, relation, which I really like.
So that empathic way of being is core to who we are as humans, so we can get better in that process. You're never going to totally 100% maybe understand someone else, but you can move towards that.
Thank you, Edwin. Feel fully heard.
Okay. I'll speak to Colin then.
Listening.
Yeah. Feel some sadness that this group, we just have 2 more times to to work on this. I think it's so important, this definition, to be really clear on how we're defining empathy, and especially this empathic way of being approach.
I'm hearing some sadness here that there's only another 2 sessions left, and this is really important work that we're clear on the definition that we use in the empathy circles.
But I do want to pick up on it as soon as possible again. So it's not like this is the end. This is just, a little bit of a hiatus.
Right. This is unfinished business, and you definitely want to come back to it.
And like most of the definitions, about empathy, everybody's saying cognitive, affective, and it's so prevalent, the definitions. And I think that what we're doing with an empathic way of being is much more powerful and kind of goes more to the core of something, of our humanity, maybe.
Okay, so there's definitions that go down the cognitive route, the affective route, but you see the way of being that Rogers talks about as being really powerful and really fundamental.
Yeah, and I made some notes here. So I guess to start with, there are different ways of being. I sort of agree with what's been said, that this empathic way of being is core to just being human, but that can be nurtured. But there's all kinds of different ways of being too. Just say there's a plethora of ways of being.
So the empathic way of being is really core to what it means to be human. But there
Seems
are,
to me, yeah.
In your opinion, it seems to be that way. But there's also many other ways of being.
Yeah, and just there's different shades. Like I know people who are like angry all the time. They're depressed, or they're happy, or they're they're dominating. They're always trying to take control, or whatever. So there's this full spectrum different ways of being. You know, Putin, I think, you know, he wants control or whatever, or, you know, it's, and it has effects, right? It has effects on how on our world.
Yes, there's many different ways of being, based on a wide variety of emotions like anger or happiness, and this influences others. It influences the world.
Yeah, impacts the world. You know, I always tell, you know, sort of one of my motivations for doing this empathy work was just the kind of the horrors of World War II that my family went through, right? It's like those ways of being that people have, you know, can have very negative consequences in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so these way of being have a real impact on the world. And talking about one of your motivations being your family background, you know, after the war.
And also what you were saying about visceral feelings, I think that's another core aspect. For me, it's like an empathic way of being is something that I sense viscerally, and then I sort of check how I relate with other people if I'm maintaining that empathic way of being. So it's very much centered in those feelings, visceral feelings or feelings. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, so empathy as a way of being, it's very much a visceral experience for you, and you're checking this feeling inside of you with others to see if that correlates or not.
I feel fully heard. Yeah, that's my time's up.
Okay, Lou, will you be my listener, please?
Yes, happy to.
I'll try to think about a time when I was empathic, and in this empathic way of being, and I mentioned it before, and maybe working through this will allow me to get my point across clearer than talking in depth about Roger's paper.
Yeah, so you're wanting to get across your understanding of empathy, and you're thinking that a way to do that would be to describe a time when you felt like you were empathic rather than discussing the ideas in Roger's paper.
Right, and maybe also talking about a time when I wasn't empathic.
Oh.
Just for a bit of balance, because I'm not always empathic, believe it or not.
Yeah, and you think some understanding might also come from talking about when you weren't empathic, because that happens too.
Mm-hmm. So when I came here to Berlin, it was after the influx of refugees from Syria, mostly, also Afghanistan and parts of Africa, and I started out as a volunteer with refugees, and then ended up working in an accommodation center, supporting them.
Yeah, so you're thinking about the time when you came to Germany after there was a large influx of refugees from various places, and your work was to work with refugees, and you worked in a refugee center.
So I don't have training as a social worker, and I was taking on some of those responsibilities. Also, I didn't always speak, wasn't always able to communicate with them, so I was had to come up with other ways of connecting.
Yeah, so even though you were working with refugees who were going through a lot of difficulty, you did not have training as a social worker, and you also didn't necessarily share language with them, so you had to find other ways of relating and connecting.
And the natural way for me was to give them the space to say what they had to say and to listen, and to show that I cared.
Yeah, and so what felt right to you was to just be present there with them and give them space to say whatever they needed to say, even if you couldn't understand it fully because you didn't understand their language. You had a sense that that would be helpful.
So I felt helpless in many regards, but at the same time, I had a power that I wasn't really aware of at the time, and it's only in hindsight that I can look back and say, well, actually, I was having impact there. It didn't, it kind of felt like it, but in the moment, but I was doubting myself because I didn't have the qualifications, I didn't have the language, and yet I was having an impact, and it was because of this care and listening that I was able to do.
Yeah, and so you're saying that at the time you felt, like you weren't really doing a good job, or you questioned whether you were because you didn't have the training and you didn't have language. But reflecting on it now or afterwards, you realize that actually what you did was very powerful. Just being a presence there for them to listen to, showing care in that way was a very powerful thing.
Right, and hearing you use the word presence, that's exactly what it was. Being there for them, a listening ear. And also, Rogers describes empathy as a way of being, as being a powerful yet subtle way of being. And that's exactly how I experienced it.
Yeah, so you're just really connecting with the awareness that being an empathic presence is a very, kind of subtle but very powerful way of being.
Right. I feel fully heard. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to Violetta.
Happy to listen.
Well, I'm feeling very appreciative of Colin for sharing that story, because I think it is an excellent example of how, being an empathic, caring presence is connecting and supportive, and that's what empathy is. And you don't have to have language. It can be done non-verbally. And it's amazing how much human beings can understand about each other and about their intentions without non-verbally, without language. And I think that's beautiful, and it's such a good example of what empathy is.
So there's two levels here that I'm hearing of going beyond language. One is when we try to define something, instead of using the definitional words, we could use a story. And you thought that the picture that Colin gave us is a very good way to define an empathic way of being, because it is a presence where without words, we're able to be there for the other and support, as he was able to do with the refugees.
Yeah, and it's interesting because so often cultural differences like that are a source of conflict, a source of disconnection. And yet here, no training, other country, cultural differences, not language, and yet human beings connect. That's empathy.
So you're giving another definition of empathy as a way of being, where instead of stirring a conflict because of cultural differences, misunderstandings, it shows that there could be differences, and they might not even speak the same language and having different cultural expectations. And even Colin wasn't trained in whatever he was doing, but empathy happened, and the result was magical.
Yeah. The other thing that kind of surfaced for me listening to everyone else is, and I've talked a little bit about this before, but not a lot. And it's a kind of a growing awareness that the training that I have in theater, how that informs my empathic way of being. So, actors and directors think about motivation and think about desire, think about basic human needs, and use that understanding. So they pay attention to that. and use that understanding in telling the stories and in creating the characters that they do to tell stories. I'll
Mm.
stop there.
So something you've talked to some people, and me including, about is the connection between the empathic way of being in your experience as an actor, and how actors and directors have to think of this kind of inner world of the characters. And then you corrected yourself, not just think, but also experience, perceive, know, kind of intuit what that person might be desiring. What are the needs of that human being? And you think this could be a very, very helpful way to stay in that empathic way of being.
Yeah, and there are two principles in theater and in acting that apply. One is every character's behavior makes sense to them. So there is, they think they're doing something good or something that makes sense to them. They're not trying to be evil. And the other is, as an actor, if you have to like your character, you can't hate your character and think that you're evil. You won't do a good performance if you do that. You have to understand why your character is doing what they're doing. It makes sense to them. And I think my practice, I have so much practice in doing that. I think that thinking about that, it really helps me in having an empathic understanding of other people and myself.
Mm-hmm. There's two principles that you think could be very easily transferred here. And the first one is, in each character, their behavior makes sense to them. They're doing everything out of some kind of an internal coherence that's happening within them. And the second principle is that in order for you to embody a character, you really need to like them. You need to be able to look at them and enjoy who they are. Otherwise, you would not do a good job being that character. And you think that these two principles, you've practiced them for so long that they've really been kind of the foundation of how you do empathy with others and with yourself.
Thank you. I feel fully heard.
You're welcome. Kara, could you be my listener, please?
I'm listening.
I love this the storytelling that's happening, and I had never heard about these two principles. Thank you, Lou. They were so wonderful. Obviously, I've never done acting outside of psychodrama, which is great, but it's definitely not professional.
So I heard that you are loving all of the storytelling happening here, and you're particularly grateful to Lou for sharing some of the acting principles, because while you have done therapeutic acting, it's not the same thing.
The two principles are very reflective of something Rogers talks about when he talks about an empathic way of being. And he argues, kind of contrary to many people, that you can't really understand the other person unless you have what he calls the unconditional positive regard, or that liking or loving, however we call it.
So it's reflective for you of some things that Rogers says, which is that you can't really understand someone else unless you have that, you said, unconditional positive
Regard.
Regard. Okay.
That's his wording, yes. Which is a big conversation, whether I need to care for the other person in order to show empathy, or could I just kind of have enough good understanding or excellent understanding of them without liking them, without looking at them with this kind of benevolence.
So for you, it brings up a bigger conversation of, do I have to care for those other people to get that understanding? Do I have to like them? Or can I understand enough?
Mm-hmm. And actually, the literature is quite divided. There's a whole lot of papers that are claiming you could, a lot of sociopaths obviously are very successful in reading people's motivations. I happen to be in the camp that believes that that is still a superficial understanding. In order to understand the other, there should be a level of care, as Colin kind of showed us in his story.
So I heard that so you note that sociopaths are quite good at reading other people's intent, and that for you, you really do believe that you have to have some level of assumed positive intent to be able to understand the other person.
And that goes back to my project, which is exploring higher empathy, and imagination being the core of that higher empathy. But the starting point of the higher empathy is that I'm choosing to look at the other. I'm choosing to make the other the center of my attention, and I'm allowing the other to come into my space. Is a little bit what you were talking about earlier.
So I heard that this triggers for you that that's part of what you're working on with the higher empathy, the imaginative empathy, that it's first a choice to be with them, and then second, allowing them to be with you.
And that would connect to what Jenna is talking about. It has been talking about altruism and care ethics, or another word, care ethics, ethics of care, is coming from the virtue ethics. This idea that I'm basing my life and behavior on care, that I'm doing things out of care. So
it connects for you to what Jenna was saying about the ethics of care, and that really it's the basics of choosing to live by care.
And I've either exceeded my time a long time ago, or Crystal forgot to put I did? Okay. Well, thank you. I feel fully heard. I'm sorry for taking more time.
Excellent. DJ, can I talk to you? Have we, DJ, who hasn't gone recently? Edwin and Jana? Should I talk to one of you two?
Or DJ.
DJ is fine.
Okay. Hi, DJ.
It doesn't have to be me. It's up to you.
You were my first thought, and then I was like, oh, am I not spreading it out enough?
Go for it.
I made notes as everybody else was talking so I could remember the thoughts that came up when you guys were all being so brilliant. So what came up for me is that it really resonated with me. It's a presence without words, that it doesn't, while we use reflection as a tool, that is not necessarily required. I thought that was
So you were taking notes so you could jot down important things that have been said in the circle. And one important thought is that we do not need to use language. We do not need to talk to have empathy.
I was thinking about the felt experience of creating that space, of that felt experience of acceptance, that felt experience of curiosity. And then I saw Violetta put the blanket on. And I immediately thought, it's like an empathetic way of being is a felt shared experience, is like when you're cold, somebody puts a warm blanket fresh from the dryer around your shoulders. Or when you're really hot and they put that nice cool hand on your forehead. It's exactly what you didn't know you needed, except that you 100% needed it.
So you're using metaphors to describe the role that empathy, receiving empathy, can feel like. And so it is a very visceral experience. And it's something that we feel and are in the present, just like we've been talking about today. But when Violetta put on her blanket, you said, wow, that's like empathy. It's like having a blanket when you're cold, or having a cold washcloth on your forehead when you're hot. And it's that ethic of care.
Yes. And it's so trying to get a definition down in my brain, the empathetic way of being is the human way, or just the way of allowing authentic self with empathy for others as a choice and assuming positive intent. That's all that came up for me with everybody.
Okay, so you're trying to come up with a definition and you're writing this stuff down and you think that you have one, and I probably lost it, but I can try. Unless you want to just repeat it for me.
I'll do it again.
Okay.
Okay, so it's the human, it's just the way of allowing our authentic self to be with others. That is a way of being empathetic, and it's a choice in assuming a positive intent.
Okay, so it's an authentic, empathetic way of being where there's a choice to be intentionally positive or intentionally caring, or there's an intent in this
And I would
exchange or
I would
collaboration.
what like how okay, so we were talking about how there's the ethic of care, and do you have to care or like somebody to understand them? And I guess I come down on the side that says I don't think you have to like or care about them, but kind of like what Lou was saying with the character, you have to assume that they are thinking they're doing the right thing. So you have to assume they have a positive intent, whether you agree
Okay.
with it.
Okay, so the positive intent is already coming from you because you're being empathetic, right? So you have that ethical care and you're offering that. And so you want to assume that the other person is also offering that their intentionality is positive, just like yours is, whether or not you agree with what they're saying, whether or not you like them as a person. That's good. Very good. Gianna, are you here?
Let's see. I have 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
I'll-
Okay, should we come back to you later, or do you want to?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
Why don't I just do 1 minute and then you do 1 minute or something like that?
Okay.
Okay, is that good, Crystal? Or maybe 1.5 minutes each?
I can do your 3 minutes and then I can take a turn some other time.
No, I don't need to listen to myself talk. That's one thing I don't need.
I'm listening.
I want to hear what you think. So yeah, Jenna, I really want to get back to what you said originally about it's very simple for you. It's about kindness. And that's an empathetic way of being is that kindness and the ethic of care. And I totally agree. I absolutely believe that kindness is important.
So you're agreeing with what I said earlier about the empathic way of being just being kind, practicing kindness. And
yeah, and I also believe in the Dalai Lama, that inner peace is where we have to start.
you also agree with the Dalai Lama that we have to start with inner peace.
Yes, ma'am. That's all I have to say.
I should. Violetta, would you like to listen to me?
Sure.
So
Listening.
yeah, I'll just do this until I can't. So a lot has been shared. So yeah, very beautiful. Colin and Lou and Karen, all about just the stories and being present and how we can maybe identify even with the perpetrators, like how we can maybe kind of non-judgmentally somehow tolerate in order to engage with another who is so different from us. So I wanted to share a definition of, I'm sorry, I'll pause.
A lot has been shared, and you're acknowledging the beauty of the conversation, the stories that have come up, and kind of this thought of can I identify, can I allow myself to connect to even the perpetrators, to see into somebody that's so different from me.
Yeah, and I'll just share that from a Buddhist perspective, the wish that everyone be happy is the definition of love.
So now you're moving on to the definition, and the wish from the Buddhist perspective, the wish that everybody is happy is love, the definition of love.
Right. To wish that everyone be happy is common sense. In other words, happy people won't kill or torture or harm other people. So wouldn't it be nice if everyone were happy? In other words, if everyone had inner peace or an empathic way of being. That's what we're wishing for everyone.
So having the wish, the kind of the goal of everybody to be happy, just is common sense. It's the wisest thing to do, because if you're happy, you don't murder, you don't steal, you don't harm others. So it just only makes sense to from the well-being for everyone to have happiness.
Right. So to wish that everyone be happy, which means to love everyone, doesn't mean you have to like them.
Mhm.
So you're drawing that distinction between love and liking the other.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that you find them pleasant or that you feel particularly comfortable in their presence, but still one has that motivation or wish that they be free of that annoying way of being.
So love is not necessarily finding the other pleasant or even enjoying their presence, but it's still wishing them to be happy, so they get rid of this annoying way of being, or whatever way of being it is.
Yeah. So that's how we can love everyone, and it just makes sense.
That's what helps the Buddhists love everyone. It's the common sense.
Well, the Buddhists aren't the only ones doing it. The Christians are loving everyone, and Jews, if they get it right, they're doing it too, and so are the Muslims, and the rest of us, scientists or non-religious, we need to kind of get with the program and understand that that's a good way to be, whether or not you have any religion or not.
Mm-hmm. So you're seeing this kind of wise approach in most religions, and also even in non-religious communities as well.
I gotta go. So
okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jenna. Crystal, would you be my listener, please? I just got done talking, but obviously I can talk for a long time as well. I will still be briefer this time, and I'm not going to spend more time on this idea of do we have to like the other. For me, it's a pretty much a set starting point of empathy, even if we don't have enough consensus on it. You're muted, Crystal.
So you're just circling back and to your prior comments and reflecting that the starting point for empathy, this concept of liking the other.
I'm pretty sure that that's what Jana was talking about, and I have more than once called the Rogerian concept of unconditional positive regard love as well. So I think we're definitely on the same page there.
And you're demonstrating how we're all building on each other's work, whether it's Jana or Carl Rogers, and how unconditional love is at its core tied to empathy.
Mm-hmm. And partially going back to the what is an empathic way of being is this process of finding that inner peace, which sometimes me as a therapist means going through a process of healing.
Yeah, and you're reflecting back as a therapist for finding that empathic way of being. It's a journey of inner peace.
I guess that's where I'll stop now. This thought of starting with myself, and being healed in a relationship, and then moving on to be healing presence for others.
And you see the process of an empathic way of being is starting with yourself and healing, and then moving on to an empathic way of being with others.
Wonderful. Thank you. I feel fully heard, Kristen.
Oh, with a minute more? I want more.
No, thank you. I took my
Okay.
share earlier.
Okay. Let me hit pause. Cara, would you be my listener?
Listening.
Yeah, let me hit reset on the timer. Takes me a minute. I have to, it's like a 3-step process, so bear with me. And it's strange when you don't finish the whole time, I actually have to manually go in and do it by the second. So rather than resetting. All right, there we go. Wow. I think this empathic way of being for me is so rooted in being present and being kind, being curious. And I'll pause there because that reflects what everyone else has shared as well. Yeah.
So I heard that the empathic way of being roots in being present, being kind, and being curious, which is how you feel and what you have heard.
Yeah. And building on that, then this unconditional love is so much a part of my way of being for others, even when they behave badly. And that's a judgment on my part. And so acknowledging that that's the experience that I needed for that moment.
So building on that, the unconditional love is the way that you choose to be, even when you judge that somebody else is behaving inappropriately, because that's what you need in that minute.
Yeah. And I think that that is the next step of being trustworthy and being a team player, that we're all on this playground called Earth.
So that is
Yeah.
the next step in being trustworthy, because we are all on this playground that is the Earth.
And again, Eckhart Tolle says this: life will give you whatever experience is most helpful for the evolution of your consciousness.
And like Eckhart says, life is going to give you whatever it is that you need to develop to where you need to go.
And if our mirror neurons are activated and we're judging others, I think it says more about me, my judgment, than it does about the other. If it's a negative judgment. Yeah.
Yeah, when our mirror neurons start activating around judgment, that says a lot more. I'm rephrasing with a term I've heard, but what someone says about you says more about them than about you.
Allie Love said that on my Peloton bike one day, and it's now a mantra. And that allows me the capacity to see the humanity in someone else, even when I'm judging them. And then I come back to, I'm just going to assume positive intent, no matter how badly they behave, because that is being empathic.
And so for you, it's to being able to see the humanity in others, regardless of how you interpret their behaviors. You assume that positive intent, that they think they are doing the right thing.
So rather than labeling people sociopaths, halo effect, or, angels, devils, let's just all see the humanity in each other and be fully present to that experience, because there is a lesson there. And to me, that embodies an empathic way of being.
And rather than labeling with sociopath or halo or an angel or a devil, just allowing yourself and the others, the other humans, to be together as humans is an empathetic way of being.
And that is unconditional love for humanity that then speaks in the power of our connection, that somewhere in the universe, we were supposed to be here on this call together, and how we can honor that and grow from that.
And that for you speaks to the unconditional love and universal understanding that what is happening is what needs to happen because it's what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Yeah. I feel like I just talked again. Edwin.
Yep, listening.
Yeah, unconditional love. I guess that's what's alive for me right now. So I'll talk just a little bit about unconditional love.
So what's really alive for you is this topic of unconditional love.
Because I love unconditionally. Speaking of telling stories, was just in a chat with a lady the other day who is discovering her woo-woo side. And at one point she's like, I love you. I don't want that to be creepy. That's not what I meant. I was like, oh no, I love you too. That's totally acceptable.
Yeah, so for you, it's totally acceptable to love people, and you're that kind of a person. And someone in your counseling was saying, "Oh, I love you," but they felt a little self-conscious about it. And you said, "No, that's absolutely fine." When they said that about you,
and I think it's interesting that is a not uncommon response to the word love. It makes people uncomfortable, and speaking of blocks, there is my block. I don't understand that.
yeah. So people can feel uncomfortable about the topic of unconditional love, and makes people uncomfortable, and you just don't understand that.
Yeah. I'm not saying I like Nazis, but some Nazi scientists were really good scientists, and they were scientists first.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that if you love everyone, that you necessarily loves Nazis, but some of them were good scientists, and that was science first before their ideology, maybe.
Yeah. And I do think that this empathetic way of being, this unconditional love, we don't have to like, we don't even have to enjoy the other person, but recognizing them as another person who has lived a full spectrum of experiences of traumas and dramas and all of the things that got them through to today. We can't really understand their specific Stardust experience. We can only accept it.
Yeah, you may not be able to understand someone's full experience, but you can just accept it.
Yeah. And that, I guess for me, that's the unconditional love thing. That's that you can love anybody for simply existing and surviving. We are the culmination of survivors. So many people had to survive so that we could be here. And that's not necessarily always great, but it is. It is what it is.
Not sure I quite got that, but that we are the survivors, that maybe through evolution, just certain people survived, and we're the ones that survived. So I just need to take that into account somehow.
Yeah. And I don't remember the term, but the culmination of survivors. It's the idea that, some 1,000 of generations past, people had dozens of children, because if you had 14, you might end up with 3. And those 3 went on to meet the other 3 that survived, and those made more children that then managed to survive, that then made more children that managed to survive, and at some point that became us.
So there's just this whole chain of people that just managed to survive, and that's how we came about. It's just the ones that from the survivors.
Yeah. So
and there's something very meaningful in that to you. There's this is like a real sense of meaning, importance to that phenomenon.
To me, it is the empathetic way of understanding that, and the empathetic way of being to choose to see that, so that that's what you see in front of you, rather than whatever the other person is presenting.
So instead of seeing someone by what they're presenting, that they're a Nazi or whatever, you're seeing their humanity in that they were come from a chain of survivors over time. So you're maybe seeing their humanity more.
Yeah. And I very, very much believe that what is needs to be. And if we could just empathetically accept that, we could work together to create what we want. That's what it is.
So if you can accept that sort of that humanity, or that these are the survivors, that kind of lets you connect better to them. Is that sort of, you're able to kind of
Yeah.
connect better to
I feel
people?
fully heard. Thank you.
Okay. Speak to Lou.
Okay.
Then yeah, this topic that came about caring for people. I don't think that you have to care. I think it sort of empathy precedes care, that you can, if you can empathize with people, care will grow out of it. So, and I see that through conflict mediation.
Yeah, so you're saying that on the topic of care, that you don't know that you have to care for someone before you empathize with them. And you think actually care grows out of empathizing.
Yeah, it can grow. It can come from a lot of different sources, but that's one source. So, when we do conflict mediation, the people don't like each other. They do not care for each other, but they're willing to dialogue and listen. And if people can just listen to each other, they start seeing the backstory, and it's like then sort of care can grow. So I just see that. So for me, kind of empathy precedes care. It's kind of like a deeper issue, a deeper feeling, that if you can just value empathy, that those other feelings will grow out of that.
So your experience with conflict mediation doing that, what you see is that people who are in conflict don't necessarily care about each other. They're have animosity towards each other. But if they begin to listen to each other and understand each other more, then care begins to grow out of that.
Yeah, and what's coming to mind is we had one person who is causing a lot of sort of issues within the empathy circle, James. He would kind of be very antagonistic in the groups, and that he would like really be critical online, about what we were doing or what I was doing, kind of it. So, and I thought there was this thing like, oh, I don't want to talk to him, right? There's this thing, I want to put up this wall and not talk to him. But I said, no, this is about empathy. So let's talk to him, right? So there's putting up those walls versus like, this is what I do, is I'm going to talk to people and empathize with them. So sort of that, yeah, that's kind of a core way of being, I think.
Yeah, so you're giving an example of someone who is very antagonistic and very criticizing, doing a lot of criticizing, and that sometimes people respond to that by putting up walls and saying, I don't want to talk to that person. But you said your position is, no, we should talk to that person. And because by talking to them is how you create understanding and care starts to happen.
Yeah, and that's the way of being, right? And it's that way of being within the anxiety. It's very scary to talk to. And there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of feeling of vulnerability that sort of comes up, right? And it's like, oh, I'd rather kind of avoid those painful feelings and not talk to the person, but just say, no, it's like the empathy is core. Empathy is, mutual empathy is central. And then going into those painful, scary, difficult, vulnerable feelings.
Yeah, so you're aware that it's not easy to do that it's painful and scary to listen to criticism and angry talking, and that, but you have a commitment. Your commitment to empathy means that you go and do that even though it's scary and frightening, and there's part of you that trusts that if you do that process, some care will emerge. So.
Yeah, and it turns out I really like James, the person who is kind of being critical and so forth. That we did multiple empathy circles together, and I quite appreciate kind of where he's coming from, even though it was sort of scary and to go into that. So yeah, and kind of everything got sort of resolved in a very positive, constructive way, I felt. So that's the empathic way of being, it seems to me, and it's not always easy.
Yeah, so by doing empathic listening with that person over time, you actually grew to understand him and to like him. And that for you, that is the empathic way of being, is kind of having a commitment to doing that. And even when it's frightening, doing it anyway.
Yeah, feel fully heard.
Okay, I will go to, who will I go to? I'll go to Jana. So I'm realizing that there's another kind of theoretical framework that I use too. And that has to do with self-protecting behaviors. So it's a kind of psychological framework that, you know, in order to survive as we're growing up, we have life experiences and we develop self-protecting behaviors to protect us, you know, in the environment that we grew up in. And that when people do things to harm other people, that I normally try to view it as a self-protecting behavior of some kind. So they're behaving in a way that I don't like, but rather than judging him for it, I'm asking myself, how are they trying to protect themselves by doing this? What's important to them, or what's happening for them that they think that they have to behave in this way?
Okay, I'm not sure I got it all, but when you see somebody behaving in a way that's maybe difficult to accept or acknowledge, one way is to look at it is to see how they're protecting themselves, that they're doing this to protect themselves. And that's one way that you can be with them.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that helps me stay in compassion for them, or empathy with them, because I can relate to needing to protect myself. I can relate to surviving. So even though I might completely disagree with what they're doing and want to stop it, you know, I can understand them to some degree if I view them as trying to protect themselves in some way.
So because you yourself have this experience of needing to survive and wanting to protect yourself, you can relate to that need and that wanting to protect themselves, and that in that way you can understand them, and that way you can also be compassionate, maintain compassion when you're with someone, even though you might want them to completely stop or change what they're doing.
Right. It doesn't mean I agree with their behavior at all, or that I wouldn't try to stop it. Yeah. Particularly if it's harming someone. Another thing I want to say has to do with authenticity. So Kara talked about authenticity, and that being an empathic way of being has to do with being authentic. And and I, you know, what it brings up for me is kind of the limits of certain words. So the limits of authenticity and the limits of kindness also. So those are two words that I value, and I think they're great words. I think they're great ways of being, but they also, like, for some people, authenticity means being honest with another person about their judgments of them, that's what being authentic is. And on the limits of kindness, that kindness means doing what I think is kind, not necessarily what the other person wants. And so even these words that we really value, like kindness, and there's limits to their to whether they contribute to connection or not.
So what comes to mind for you for authenticity and for kindness is the limits of these words, and the need to be, so even though we value authenticity, or we might value kindness, we need to be aware of the limits of these, and to clearly define them perhaps also. So authenticity could mean that somebody is being, you know, brutally honest and, you know, sharing their judgments of other people. And it could be that kindness is what?
Sometimes kindness is doing what you think is kind versus what the other person actually would like.
Thank you. So kindness is doing what you think another person might want or need, and then you think you're being kind to them, but actually it might be not what they want, or you didn't say need, but also what they need.
Yeah, thank you. I feel heard.
Let's see. I have to go in 40 seconds. I'll be right back. Okay, you want to wait for 2 seconds? I have to ask questions. No, I can't. So somebody else is going to have to do it. Colin, perfect.
Okay, thanks, Gianna. I just wanted to go one last time. Who'd like to listen? Who'd like to be my active listener? I'll go with Edwin for one last go, if that's all right.
Listening.
Okay. So I've been thinking about challenges as well of being empathic. That came up as a theme with you, Edwin, and with Lou. And I also wanted to have some balance in that I'm not an empathic person all of the time. So let me just address that briefly.
So you'd like to be more balanced about maybe the blocks to empathy, that you're not always empathic all the time, some of the challenges
Right.
of empathy.
So I'm doing this compassionate communication course, which is NVC essentially. And one thing that I'm learning is that to be empathic for someone else, I need to be in the right space, the right headspace, the right heart space as well. And so I may need to give myself empathy first of all.
Yeah, so you're learning from this course that you're taking that to be empathic for others, you need to be in the right space, sort of a empathic space for your headspace for yourself.
Yeah, and in the past I've struggled a lot with my emotions and wasn't able to connect with others because I was just so overwhelmed by my feelings, and I just wasn't able to be empathic.
Yeah, and this relates to yourself, that you can get overwhelmed with your feelings, which keeps you from being empathic towards others.
Right. So this ties in with, showing myself empathy, self-empathy. That means slowing down, feeling the feelings, and understanding what they're telling me.
So that getting in that space for yourself means slowing down, tapping into those feelings of yours and seeing what those feelings are trying to say to you.
Right. And because it's, the ultimate aim there would be to find out what my need is. And knowing that need, then I guess you could call it a felt meaning. If you were feeling into your body, you could tie it in with Gendlin's work. Then I can make a request, or maybe I can satisfy that need myself, or make a request to have that need met.
Yeah, so you can sense into yourself and see what is the need that you're having, and then maybe try to address that need of your own, so that you can kind of get in that space to be able to listen and empathize with others.
Right. Because when I'm caught up in my emotions, I cannot hear the other person, and I'm misinterpreting what they're telling me. I'm perceiving them differently, and that's not a place where you can be empathic.
Yeah, when you get into that space, you're just sort of misinterpreting others, and you just can't be empathic in that space. So you're really trying to work through your own inner self to have that more empathic grounding, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And then just briefly on judgments, I judge other people, believe it or not, and compassionate communication is telling me that I can learn from what those judgments are telling me. They have valuable information, and I can find out what the need is underneath that. I don't have to express those judgments, of course, but I can process them. And when I process them and find out what the need is, then again, I'm in that empathic space for someone else.
So you're confessing that you judge people, being a little self-conscious about that or humorous about it too. But you're seeing that if you can tap into your judgments, that you can really see what the need is behind those judgments. So it could be, yeah, it could be an approach you're trying to develop.
Mm-hmm. So in conclusion, I'm joining up the dots between compassionate communication, Roger's way of being, my own training in emotional intelligence, and God knows what else,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to bring it all together to form my definition of empathy. So I can be consistent when I talk about empathy, but of course it'd be great if we could, as a group, could be consistent about the culture of empathy's definition.
Yeah, you're trying to integrate all these different practices that you're doing and coming up with your own definition, and then also seeing that it's good if we can all come up with a common definition, understanding it as well.
Yeah, I feel fully heard. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. So we just have about 12 minutes left. Maybe we can just kind of open it up. I had thought we could maybe, review the notes and so forth, but that's quite a big job. Maybe we can do it on our own if you feel inspired to go into the notes, and do any sort of organization of the notes. We have, I don't know if there's, any.
Those
PJ?
public? Are those notes public?
Yeah, they're sort of semi-public, if people know the link, they could find it, but they're not like, that they're, yeah.
They're not linked to the recording.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
they're linked from the website Defining Empathy. So there's a link to them there. So I guess they are public. It's not like anybody cares, but
And if anyone wants to go in, Edwin had stopped taking notes, so I started. If you want to go in and edit them specifically, because if they are public, you might not like my interpretation of what was said, please feel free to modify it.
So
yeah,
I just want,
go ahead.
oh,
Okay, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say that what Colin just brought up about capacity, that I don't always have the capacity to be empathic, is, I think, a really important point, that people reach their capacity. And that's being aware of that, or having other people involved, so that someone in the group has capacity to listen. That's often why conflict happens, is because nobody has the capacity to be empathic. Everybody needs to be heard, and nobody's got the capacity to be empathic.
Yeah, and that's where the empathy circle for me comes in. It's almost like a grounding capacity. It's almost like a backstop, right? It's like, okay, things are really, I'm losing my capacity. Can I bring it into an empathy circle with whoever I'm in conflict with? Because I just trust that this process, everybody being heard, I can work out any issues, that kind of come up. So for me, that's sort of a backstop, that whatever the conflict is, can I bring it into an empathy circle to talk it through? And I just sort of trust that will resolve the conflict in the long run, given enough time.
Yeah, and for me, part of self-empathy is recognizing when I don't have the capacity and saying, I don't want to engage right now, or I can't talk about this right now, or I need some time to process before I could talk to you more about this.
I wanted to say that I agree with Edwin that empathy precedes, what I call it's not only me, but the ethics of virtue, or embodying kindness. And kindness would be doing what's appropriate, not what one wants. But that definition would mean what's appropriate, what would be helpful, actually, not what would be helpful because I think so. but it's foundational, like ethics is foundational. So first of all, non-harming, and then one can evolve gradually to universal love or unconditional love, or or unconditional positive regard. And similarly, empathy is a foundational practice that would precede, then embodying kindness appropriately at all times. Yeah. So yeah, and therefore very important practices, very valuable and necessary. We all need this.
Just open forum, just say anything for the next 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, I would like to say something. I don't buy into all of this judgment stuff. I really don't. I just, I think people are going to say what they're going to say. People are going to do what they're going to do. It's out of your control, I really, I know it sounds really cold, Lou, but when I tell people I don't care what others think of me, they think I'm being really cold and horrible, and I'm actually not. I'm actually protecting myself, but in a positive way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, Marshall Rosenberg says, you shouldn't listen to the judgment, you shouldn't listen to people's judgments of you. It's not healthy for you and it's not healthy for them. And, there are limits to that too. If you're not willing to get any kind of feedback from other people, that's also, you're cutting yourself off from a source of important information. But I think, so I'm not sure what you mean when you said, I don't buy all this judgment stuff. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like I don't get lost in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can remember like what my 4th grade teacher told me or my 3rd grade teacher told me, and it was so devastating, and I can still describe the moment and the devastation of it. Well, I mean, that's terrible, right? And so I've learned as an adult to just let it go when it happens. People are going to say stuff. Some of it's helpful, some of it's constructive, some of it's not. And to be able to distinguish, what's helpful, what's not helpful, what's unhelpful, what's toxic, and to have these boundaries so toxicity doesn't come inside. And that's really what I was writing all about how I let toxicity in my life, when I was younger, because I thought, I'll just love them. I'll just love them through all this violence and abuse, right? Well, that's bonkers, basically. And so that's what I mean, is that we really have to be true to ourselves and always protect ourselves, because if we're not protecting ourselves in a good way, because it can be good when you protect yourself, then we can't really love the world. Dalai Lama says inner peace first and then world peace. We as individuals have to be peaceful in order to have world peace. And to me, empathy is peace. Being empathetic brings peace, but it doesn't always. Some people are just going to be violent, right? Some people are just going to be angry, or some people are just going to be whoever they are. And, I can't go around and be judging them. That's not my job to judge them. I don't have the time to judge others, and I don't have the time to just have judgments coming toward me. And one of the things about the empathy circle that I like is that it gives us the space and the time and the patience. It slows everything down. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think that's why it works, because we have that time to digest it and sort it out and organize it. Okay, is that worth reacting to? Nah. Forget that. Does that have meaning? Nah, forget that. Where's the real meaning here? Where's that core meaning? Like Edwin said, it's about that core essence, that core beingness. It's at that, and that's what we get to in these empathy circles, is that coreness. I think that's the miracle of the empathy circle for me.
I would agree with that. That's the that you are free to express judgments, not that that's something great, but you are free to express judgment, but the judgment will be met with empathy, right? So that judgment will be heard. So if Colin's talking about, oh, I want to meet my judgments with empathy, the empathy circle is modeling that. So so I do see that this is a really good backstop foundational practice for learning all those things, those approaches, that way of being. So I did want to, we just have 5 minutes left. I want to keep us on time. So next week we have the presentations. Just want to make sure we're all set for those. We have Lou, Violetta, are you up for? It's either that or, you know, the 27th. So, and DJ and Colin are doing the 27th already. So
So I will, yes.
you're good for that, for the 20th? Okay, so we got Lou and Violetta, Colin and DJ. Anybody else want to get on the schedule? Otherwise, that's okay. I just want to be sure we have that set. So next week, Lou and Violetta, it's all yours. You've got an hour. You can, yeah, you got the full 2 hours. You can kind of fill it.
Can I make one more comment about
Oh.
empathy all the time, or loving people all the time?
Oh yeah, you're just chopping it a bit. Okay.
Sure. Well, first off, I think, you know, the idea of loving people all the time, I think what actually loving someone means can take different forms. So loving them doesn't necessarily mean just being nice and empathetic all the time. And with regard to empathy all the time, so I'm very aware of my own tendency is to respond to people with empathy, you know, because that's kind of my thing. And so I always want to try to show understanding and stuff, but I'm also aware that sometimes it doesn't always create the connection or the relationship that I want. And so I try to hold on to what Kit Miller advised me, which I think is very wise, that if I try empathy 3 times and it's not creating a connection, try honesty. Meaning, say what's going on for me instead of trying to understand what's going on for the other person. So I think that's that kind of balance, I think, is a good. And by honesty, it doesn't mean judging the other person. It means saying what's important to me. What do I want? Making a request, telling people about the impact on me. You know, what's happening for me. That sometimes that creates connection, or that creates what I want in a relationship. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I just would like to add, building on that, and this meaning making, I think that so much of what we say and do every day is tied to this need for belonging, meaning, and purpose, even though some of us say otherwise. And I think that these self-protecting behaviors are blocks to empathy. And so it raises the question of how to bridge those divides when people are placing judgments. And from my perspective, when I see judgments, I have enough inner peace to know when that is about me or when that is about them. And then I can move forward with joy, regardless of the other person's capacity to move forward in our connection or in our disconnection. And I think that is the power of empathy, and having this, as we've each shared, our capacity to see the child in each person, and our capacity to be fully present and have survived the lives that we've lived, and how we can go forward, you know, in peace together, hand in hand, and love each other regardless of our actions. And to me, that is fully embracing an empathic way of being with everyone on this planet, even someone who's behaving as horrific as Putin at this point. So how to see where he got lost. And just one other thing, all the research points to that our brains do experience the same amount of pain as physical pain when we feel a spirit of rejection. And so I think that ties to that belonging, meaning, and purpose, and where we are. So thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so maybe just take a one-word closing, just so everybody has a chance. One word, Colin, before we end. You're muted.
Experiencing.
Violetta,
I think tired. I feel tired.
Jenna,
Joy.
Lou,
Grateful.
DJ,
Spirituality.
Crystal,
Liberating.
happy. Redwin. All right, see you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Thanks.
everybody. Thanks.
Edwin, do you want me to stay or?
Yeah,
and-
please.
yeah.
Yeah, well, let me just end the recording. Bye, Jenna.